Charles Spurgeon, known as the Prince of Preachers, is one of the most admired figures in Christian history, remembered for his unique ability to connect people with God's transformative stories. Despite facing profound personal challenges, he devoted his life to seeking, understanding, and sharing the eternal truths found in Scripture. His passion was to translate the complexities of faith into simple, clear, and powerful messages that reached the hearts of all who listened. The life of Charles Spurgeon is a journey marked by internal struggles, triumph, and transformation. Born on June 19, 1834 in Kelvedon, a quiet village in Essex, England, Spurgeon grew up in a society undergoing constant change. The Industrial Revolution brought progress but also uncertainties. Factories expanded, but with them came social tensions and questions about religion's role in an increasingly materialistic era. In this context, many, including Spurgeon, sought deeper answers to life. From an early age, Spurgeon stood out. Though only 15 years old, he was introspective, intelligent, and inclined toward reading. He not only read but absorbed and reflected on the words. Growing up in a family with strong Christian roots, Spurgeon was profoundly influenced by his grandfather, James Spurgeon, a respected pastor, and by a home filled with spiritual discussions and Christian books. This exposure to great theological works and classics like John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress shaped his mind but also placed a heavy burden on him. He felt the weight of spiritual expectations, which caused deep restlessness. While many young people his age were engaged in trivial activities, Spurgeon wrestled with existential questions. He saw himself as deeply flawed, incapable of achieving inner peace. The concept of sin tormented him. Though he intellectually understood the Bible's teachings on grace and redemption, it didn't seem sufficient. He carried a spiritual burden that left him feeling isolated and helpless. The turning point came on a cold January morning in 1850, a day Spurgeon would never forget. As he walked through the streets, searching for relief for his anguished soul, the weather mirrored his emotional state. Gray, cold, and hopeless. Almost by chance, he entered a small Methodist chapel in Colchester. That day, the regular preacher was absent, and a layman took the pulpit. A simple man with no great oratory skills, his message was direct and powerful. The text was Isaiah 45:22. "Look unto me, and be ye saved, all the ends of the earth." Spurgeon later described how those words seemed to speak directly to his heart. The preacher pointed to the congregation and said, "You don't need to do anything but look to Christ to be saved." That simplicity was revolutionary for Spurgeon. For the first time, he understood that salvation was not achieved through human effort, but by trusting in something greater than himself. In that moment, his life changed. He left the chapel with a sense he had never experienced before: peace. It was not just a fleeting emotion, but a profound conviction that he had found what he had been searching for. From that moment, Spurgeon began to see his life with clarity and purpose. He knew that this experience was not just for him, but for anyone seeking the truth. A few months later, in 1850, Spurgeon took the next step in his spiritual journey by being baptized in the River Lark near Ileham. This baptism was a significant event, not only for him, but for his community. To Spurgeon, the act was more than a ritual. It was a public declaration of his inner transformation. The young man who had once carried the weight of guilt now felt the freedom of someone who had found his purpose. The impact of this transformation extended beyond him. Spurgeon began to share his experience with others, and many were touched by his authenticity. He spoke with passion and simplicity, and his message was clear. Anyone, regardless of their condition, could experience the same transformation. To him, the Bible was more than a book. It was a guide to life, filled with stories of how God acted in human history, bringing hope and renewal. Spurgeon's experience on that cold morning was the beginning of a life dedicated to exploring and sharing God's stories. He realized that, just as he had been transformed by a simple message, others could be too. This conviction would remain with him for the rest of his life, shaping his ministry and impacting millions around the world. After his conversion, Charles Spurgeon delved deeply into his spiritual and theological formation, shaping himself into one of the greatest communicators in Christian history. Raised in a devout family environment, Spurgeon had access to a vast collection of Christian literature from a young age. His grandfather, James Spurgeon, was a pastor of a small congregation and played a crucial role in his early formation. Under his godly influence, Spurgeon began to explore great theological works, especially those of the Puritans, whose spiritual depth shaped his worldview. Among his favorite readings were the writings of John Owen, Thomas Watson, and Richard Sibbes, known for their practical and deeply biblical approach. However, the book that impacted him the most was The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. The allegory of Christian's spiritual journey, the protagonist of the book, strongly resonated with Spurgeon. He saw in Christian struggles the same burden he carried before his conversion and the liberation he experienced when he looked to Christ. Although Spurgeon had access to this intellectual and spiritual wealth, he wrestled with internal restlessness. Despite understanding the theory of grace and salvation, he constantly struggled against human nature, the weight of sin, and the inability to achieve perfection on his own. This tension did not discourage him. On the contrary, it motivated him to seek deeper answers in the Bible and the texts he studied. This internal struggle shaped his future preaching, which was both deeply theological and accessible to ordinary people. At the age of 16, Spurgeon took an unexpected step. He preached his first sermon. It was in the small village of Teversham near Cambridge, where he had been invited to speak at a gathering. Although young and inexperienced, Spurgeon already demonstrated an uncommon ability to connect with people. He spoke with clarity, passion, and conviction that many seasoned pastors admired. From that moment, it was clear he had a calling for ministry. Although Spurgeon's formal education was limited, he never attended a theological college. This did not prevent him from becoming one of the most well-prepared preachers of his generation. He believed that true spiritual formation came from a balance between study and dependence on God. Spurgeon dedicated hours to reading, memorizing Bible passages, and reflecting on their meaning. This discipline made him a preacher of profound learning, even without the academic titles many considered essential. Another fundamental aspect of Spurgeon's formation was his ability to apply biblical truths to the cultural and social context of his time. He lived during a period of great challenges, including growing industrialization, the rise of secularism, and the social tensions that came with these changes. Spurgeon addressed these issues in his sermons in a way that resonated with both factory workers and the intellectual elite. Spurgeon also understood that theological formation was not just an individual matter. He deeply valued the Christian community and believed that mutual learning was essential for spiritual growth. This vision later led him to found the Pastors' College, where hundreds of preachers were trained to continue the mission of spreading Christ's message to the world. Spurgeon's spiritual and theological formation was a lifelong journey. He faced doubts, challenges, and pressures, but each obstacle served to strengthen his faith and shape his ministry vision. This solid foundation would be crucial for the impact he would have in the coming decades, both in England and around the world. At 16 years old, with just one sermon preached, Charles Spurgeon was already seen as someone with a special gift for communicating biblical truths. He possessed a clarity of thought and a passion in speech that captivated any audience. It didn't take long for him to start preaching regularly in nearby villages. However, at the age of 19, he received his first significant invitation to lead a small Baptist church in Waterbeach, a rural community in spiritual decline. In Waterbeach, Spurgeon's impact was immediate. He began attracting both local farmers and industrial workers who were used to viewing religion as distant from their daily realities. His messages, rich in stories, everyday examples, and practical application, deeply touched everyone who listened. During this time, he began solidifying the style that would define his preaching, accessible yet deeply rooted in Scripture. Spurgeon's fame grew rapidly. At 20 years old, he was invited to preach at the New Park Street Chapel, a traditional Baptist church in the heart of London that was experiencing a decline in membership. It was a bold decision for the church leaders, as Spurgeon was young and relatively unknown. But to the surprise of many, his first sermon at New Park Street was a success. His message was direct, full of vigor, and brought a freshness the church hadn't experienced in years. Within months, the congregation began to grow. People from all over London came to hear Spurgeon. He had a gift for simplifying what seemed complex and bringing biblical stories to life. Unlike many preachers of the time, who used elaborate language and lengthy discourses, Spurgeon spoke from the heart, using metaphors and stories everyone could understand. As the congregation grew, the New Park Street Chapel became too small to accommodate everyone who wanted to hear Spurgeon. This led to one of the most significant moments in his ministerial career: the move to the Surrey Gardens Music Hall, a venue with a capacity of 10,000 people. Even in such a large space, the services were always full. Spurgeon preached to crowds week after week, often without a microphone, relying solely on his powerful voice and ability to engage the audience. However, Spurgeon's ministerial success also brought challenges. During a service at the Surrey Gardens Music Hall in October 1856, a tragedy deeply shook the young pastor. Someone falsely shouted, "Fire!" during the sermon, causing a panic that resulted in deaths and many injuries. Spurgeon was devastated by the incident. He entered a deep emotional crisis, marked by feelings of guilt and depression. Yet, even in these difficult moments, he found strength in prayer and the faith community surrounding him. This episode marked a turning point in Spurgeon's life. He realized that his ministry was not just about drawing crowds, but about sustaining faith even amidst adversity. This understanding shaped his approach to preaching and pastoral care, making him even more empathetic and sensitive to people's spiritual needs. The continued growth of his congregation led to the construction of the Metropolitan Tabernacle, inaugurated in 1861. With a capacity for 5,000 seated attendees, the tabernacle became the center of Spurgeon's ministry. He preached there regularly, often 2 or 3 times a week, always with the same energy and passion he had shown at the start of his career. His preaching reached not only those who attended the tabernacle, but also thousands around the world through the publication of his sermons in newspapers and books. Spurgeon was a leader with a clear vision. He believed that ministry should not be confined to the pulpit, but should impact all aspects of society. This commitment led him to expand his work beyond the church, investing in educational projects, philanthropic initiatives, and especially in training new spiritual leaders. His vision was of an active, transformative Christianity that influenced both souls and societal realities. Thus, the young preacher who began in a small chapel in rural England became one of the most influential voices of his generation. His rise in ministry was the result of a unique combination of passion, tireless work, and deep dependence on God. Spurgeon not only preached about transformation, he lived it, and this inspired everyone around him. Despite his phenomenal success, Charles Spurgeon's life and ministry were not free from profound challenges. From unexpected tragedies to personal and physical battles, Spurgeon faced pressures that could have overwhelmed any ordinary person. However, these difficulties only deepened his dependence on God and shaped his character, making his message even more powerful and authentic. One of the greatest tragedies of his career was the incident at Surrey Gardens Music Hall, which left emotional scars on Spurgeon. He never fully overcame the pain of the event, and the echoes of panic lingered in his mind for years. The burden of leading such a large congregation while dealing with guilt and sorrow was immense. Yet Spurgeon found solace in prayer. He often said that prayer was the lungs of his ministry. Without it, he could not continue. In addition to emotional challenges, Spurgeon also suffered from chronic health problems throughout his life. He battled gout, severe arthritis, and depression, which often forced him to step away from the pulpit. During these periods, he spent weeks in recovery, struggling with intense pain and feelings of uselessness. Even so, during these moments, he continued writing, producing sermons and devotionals that encouraged millions worldwide. Spurgeon also faced criticism for his firm stance on theological issues. During the downgrade controversy, he opposed what he perceived as a weakening of fundamental Christian doctrines in some churches of the time. This position cost him friendships and important alliances, but he remained steadfast in his convictions, believing that biblical truth must be preserved at all costs. Despite these difficulties, Spurgeon continued preaching to thousands each week. He believed the challenges in his life were not obstacles, but opportunities to demonstrate the strength of God's grace. This belief made his messages even more impactful, as he spoke not just as a preacher, but as someone deeply familiar with life's pains. A striking aspect of Spurgeon's ministry was his holistic vision of pastoral care. He believed the gospel was not only for transforming the soul, but also for impacting the body and society. Inspired by figures like George Muller, he founded orphanages, developed programs to assist the poor, and created educational institutions. He often said that authentic Christianity should be demonstrated through concrete acts of love and service. At the heart of this work was the Metropolitan Tabernacle, which was more than just a place of preaching. It was a hub for community action. During services, groups of intercessors prayed continuously, believing the power of preaching was directly connected to prayer. Spurgeon emphasized that his effectiveness in the pulpit depended more on divine intervention than on his natural abilities. This acknowledgement of total dependence on God was a hallmark of his ministry. Spurgeon also invested heavily in leadership development. He founded the Pastors' College, a school for training preachers, which during his lifetime prepared over 900 spiritual leaders. He not only taught them to preach, but also encouraged them to live with integrity and care for their congregations with love and dedication. To him, a pastor's role went beyond teaching. It was about shepherding, guiding people on their spiritual journeys, and being a constant presence in their lives. Over the years, the impact of Spurgeon's ministry extended beyond England's borders. His sermons were translated into multiple languages and distributed worldwide. He published over 140 books and 3,653 sermons, many of which continue to be read today. Spurgeon believed that God's word was alive and powerful, and that even after his death, his messages would continue to impact lives. Despite all the pressures and challenges, Spurgeon remained faithful to his mission of proclaiming the gospel and caring for people. His life demonstrated how faith can sustain a person through life's most difficult adversities. He didn't just preach about hope and perseverance, he lived those truths. And that made all the difference. The legacy of Charles Spurgeon transcends his era and continues to resonate in Christian communities and beyond. His impact was not limited to the pulpit or the crowds who heard him in person. It extended across generations through his vast intellectual output and initiatives that shaped spiritual leaders worldwide. More than a century after his death, Spurgeon remains a central figure in Christian history. One of the most impressive aspects of his legacy is the sheer volume of his written works. Spurgeon published more than 140 books, along with weekly sermons that were transcribed and distributed globally. His writings covered a wide range of topics, from theology to practical advice for Christian living. Among his most popular works are The Treasury of David, a commentary on the Psalms, and Morning and Evening, a daily devotional that continues to inspire readers worldwide. In addition to books and sermons, Spurgeon was an innovator in using media to expand his reach. He understood the importance of effective communication and invested in printing and distributing his sermons. In an era with limited communication tools, Spurgeon managed to reach a global audience, influencing lives on distant continents. His work was translated into multiple languages, allowing his ideas to cross cultural barriers. Another pillar of his legacy was his vision for spiritual leadership training. The Pastors' College, founded by him in 1856, became a center of excellence for training preachers. Spurgeon believed well-prepared leaders were essential for the spiritual and moral growth of communities. He taught not only theology but also emphasized character, integrity, and compassion in ministry. During his lifetime, more than 900 pastors were trained at the institution, many of whom continued to multiply his impact in churches worldwide. Philanthropy also played a central role in Spurgeon's legacy. Inspired by George Muller, he founded orphanages that provided education, shelter, and care for abandoned and disadvantaged children. He believed that Christian faith should manifest in concrete actions that positively impacted society. Spurgeon's orphanages were a practical example of combining spiritual and material care. However, Spurgeon's impact was not confined to his time. He was also a staunch defender of preserving biblical truth amidst cultural changes. During the downgrade controversy, he took a firm stand against trends he considered a threat to the core doctrines of Christianity. Although this stance garnered criticism and even isolated him from some circles, his determination to defend the faith left a lasting example of courage and commitment. Spurgeon's legacy is also reflected in how he approached prayer and spirituality. He said that prayer was the driving force of his ministry and encouraged his congregations to depend on God in all things. At the Metropolitan Tabernacle, groups of intercessors prayed continuously during services, something Spurgeon considered essential to the power of his preaching. He believed that without prayer, all human effort was futile. Throughout his life, Spurgeon demonstrated humility that contrasted with his fame. He often reminded people that his success was not the result of his abilities, but of God's grace. Despite all his influence, he never lost sight of his primary mission, pointing people to Christ. Today, the impact of Charles Spurgeon can be seen in many aspects of Christian life. His works are still widely read, his sermons continue to be studied, and his example inspires spiritual leaders around the world. He not only lived a life of great impact, but also left a legacy that continues to transform lives and communities. Charles Spurgeon's personal life was marked by profound challenges, but also by unwavering dedication to his mission. His marriage to Susanna Thompson was one of the great sources of strength that sustained him throughout his journey. The two met shortly before Spurgeon began his ministry in London, and it quickly became clear that Susanna shared his passion for faith and Christian service. Susanna played a fundamental role in Spurgeon's ministry, supporting him amid pressures and challenges. However, she also faced her own battles. After the birth of their twin sons, Charles and Thomas, Susanna suffered from chronic health issues that left her largely confined to their home. Despite this, she remained an active collaborator in Spurgeon's work. One of her most notable projects was founding the Book Fund, which distributed free theological books to pastors with limited financial resources. The relationship between Charles and Susanna was deeply marked by love and mutual support. Spurgeon frequently mentioned his wife in his sermons, referring to her as an invaluable companion in his journey. Despite both of their health challenges, Susanna with her chronic illness and Charles with severe gout and intermittent depression, they leaned on their faith and found comfort in each other. Spurgeon's health issues were a constant in his adult life. He suffered from gout, rheumatoid arthritis, and kidney failure, conditions that often left him incapacitated for long periods. On several occasions, he had to retreat to the south of France, where the milder climate partially alleviated his pain. Even during these absences, Spurgeon never stopped writing. His letters, devotionals, and sermons were sent from wherever he was, maintaining his connection with the church and the public that admired him so much. In the final years of his life, Spurgeon's health deteriorated even further. The physical and emotional pressures of his ministry, combined with chronic illnesses, took a heavy toll. Nevertheless, he remained active as long as he could, preaching at the Metropolitan Tabernacle and overseeing the pastor's college and the orphanages he had founded. He believed that each day given to him was an opportunity to serve. Charles Spurgeon passed away on January 31st, 1892, at the age of 57, in Menton, France, where he had been receiving medical treatment. His death was deeply felt not only by his congregation, but also by Christians around the world. His funeral was a grand event, attended by thousands who came to pay their respects. His influence was acknowledged by religious leaders, politicians, and even British royalty, who highlighted his impact on society. The life of Charles Spurgeon showed how one person can transform the world around them by deeply committing to a purpose. He not only preached messages that touched the hearts of thousands, but also lived a life that reflected the authenticity of his faith. His story is marked by moments of pain, overwhelming challenges, and internal struggles, but also by unwavering trust in God and a passion for impacting lives. One of the most inspiring aspects of Spurgeon was his dedication to a simple yet powerful gospel. He never sought to complicate the message he believed was the key to human transformation. Even as a highly learned preacher, he made a point to speak in a way that anyone, regardless of education or background, could understand and apply. His inclusive approach is one of the reasons his messages remain relevant more than a century later. Spurgeon also demonstrated resilience. He faced tragedies, debilitating health problems, and the burden of leading a massive ministry. Yet he never allowed these difficulties to prevent him from fulfilling his calling. On the contrary, he used his weaknesses as opportunities to demonstrate the power of grace. Through his words and actions, Spurgeon showed that life's challenges can be met with courage when we have a greater purpose. Furthermore, Spurgeon's legacy goes beyond the pulpit. His philanthropy, commitment to leadership development, and care for the marginalized show that he understood the gospel as something to be lived, not just preached. His vision of Christianity was holistic, uniting spiritual transformation with practical acts of love and service. Today, Spurgeon continues to inspire not only preachers, but anyone seeking to live a meaningful life. His story has shown us that, regardless of where we begin or the challenges we face, we can leave a lasting impact on the world by choosing to live with purpose, integrity, and faith. So, did you enjoy this incredible story? I'm sure you'll be even more amazed by the content in the video linked in the card above. Now, I want to hear from you. What inspired you the most about Charles Spurgeon's story? Share your thoughts in the comments, but write something unexpected. Maybe an insight that came to mind. And don't forget to hit the like button and, of course, support the channel by clicking the subscribe button and turning on the notification bell. That way you won't miss any of the incredible stories coming your way. Thank you so much, and see you next time.